One of the reasons I really got into animation this year was I really wanted to add cool effects to my illustrations and just kind of help bring them to life. If this is something that you are really wanting to do with your own art, I'm going to walk you through how I took my illustration and added some animation to it. If you are brand new to animating, don't worry, because I'm going to take you through step by step what I did to add some animation to my illustration. I'm going to be animating in Procreate. You can use whatever animation software you want. I find Procreate just to be the easiest. A lot of these tips will apply to whatever animation software that you want to use. If you are a beginner, I really recommend Procreate. I don't think the interface is super difficult to learn, and I do have a video on learning to animate in Procreate if you want to check that video out first. We're going to start by having our illustration. If you're animating in Procreate like I am, make sure that you have the animation assist on. Before we start animating, it's really important to figure out what you actually want to animate in your illustration, and you want that to be on a separate layer. So for this illustration, I have 3 separate layers. I have some leaves at the bottom of the illustration I want to move, and then I have fire that's in front of the character and then fire that's behind her. I wanted to see if I could animate the fire at different speed, and I actually think it turned out pretty good, so I'll show you how I did that. But first I'm going to start with animating the leaves at the bottom of the illustration. I really wanted it to look like there was wind, like blowing the leaves around. I could have went frame by frame and redrawn each leaf and made it look like it was like billowing in the wind, but I'm lazy, so what I did is I took the easy way out and I just used the liquify tool on Procreate. I would duplicate my leaf layer, just use the liquify tool to move it slightly. You don't want there to be a huge gap between frames, because when you do that in your animation it'll show as like a huge gap and it'll be really obvious. Just move the object with the liquify tool slightly, and then you'll just duplicate that new layer, and then you'll do it again and move it slightly, duplicate it, and again and again. And then once I have this done, I'm actually going to clean up some of the just weird spots, especially around the edges of the illustration. You can see there were some weird spots where the liquify kind of made it look wonky, so I'm just going through each frame and fixing that really quick. Once I have this done, I'm actually going to group all of the frames that I just made of the leaves, and then I'm going to duplicate that group, and then I'm going to ungroup everything. So what this does is just give me a ton of frames to work with. It's going to loop through the animation that I just made, but it'll look very natural. In Procreate's animation assist, every layer becomes a frame. And so my initial illustration that I had, it doesn't act as like a background for the animation. It's just part of a frame. So to fix this, all I do is just duplicate that layer a bunch of times, take all of the frames that I just made and merge them down individually on that initial illustration. There's probably an easier way to do this, I just don't know it, so this is the easiest way that I found that works. If you know of an easier way, let me know in the comments. So right now the animation looks something like this, and now we're gonna do the fire that's in front of the character. Fire is a little more complicated, obviously. I already have a base layer of my fire that I'm gonna start with. That's actually gonna be frame 1 for the fire, and then what I'm gonna do is actually just duplicate that layer, and then I'm going to use that as a base for my next frame. And I read somewhere that whenever you are animating fire, the best way to make it look like kind of realistic is to kind of imagine that you have like a ball of gas that's like moving through the fire. It's kind of hard to explain, but I hope that if you're ever trying to animate fire, I hope that helps you, because that actually helped me kind of make sense of how to make this look like decently realistic. And basically what I'm doing is I duplicated my initial frame for the fire, and I'm just going to paint and erase and kind of imagine like a ball of gas moving through it. Sometimes whenever you do an animation, whenever you get to the end of the animation and it loops back to the beginning, there's a gap. You know, your animation will start here and end here, and when it comes back over here, there's like that gap in between frames. If you don't bridge that gap, whenever the animation loops, there'll be a gap and it'll start back over here. And I didn't want that. I wanted my animation to be like a seamless loop. So I made about 5 different frames. Once I got to my last frame, what I actually did was duplicated my first frame and put it at the top, so that way I could see it in the animation and turn that layer on and off and just check it. I'm actually going to delete that layer. I just use that as like a reference so I can see and make sure that it lines up. This way my last frame I know will line up with my first frame, so whenever my animation loops, it's all gonna look seamless. I'm going to duplicate these fire frames. I'm gonna merge them down on each individual frame that I made before with the leaves. This can get a little confusing, so I recommend renaming your layers. That way you can remember like what order each one goes in, because you're gonna do a lot of duplicating, and just make sure that it's all in order. And then finally, I'm going to animate the fire in the back. And I'm still following that same mindset of animating fire, but this one I actually wanted to move at a slower pace than the fire in front of the character. I just thought that would be a cool variation. This was my first attempt at it, and I actually think it turned out really well. All I did was I took my base layer and then I duplicated it, and then I would draw or erase on top of that, and then I would duplicate that layer so that I ended up with 3 different frames. And I'm gonna do the same thing that I did a minute ago with the other fire, where I duplicate it and merge it down on the individual frames that I already have. But the difference here is I'm actually going to take the same layer and put it on multiple frames. And this is what's going to help it give that slower speed than the other fire, because the other fire, I had a new layer for each frame. This one, I'm going to be using the same layer a couple of times, and then I'll switch to my second frame. So I'm going to take my first fire layer and duplicate it 3 times, and then merge that down on frames 1, 2, and 3. Then I'm going to take my second fire layer, I'm going to duplicate it 3 times, and I'm going to merge it on frames 4, 5, and 6. And then my third fire layer is going to go on frames 7, 8, and 9. So that's different from what I did previously, where fire layer 1 went with frame 1, fire layer 2 went with frame 2. I'll show you the animation here in a second, and you'll see that it actually gives like a slower effect. I could have made it even slower if I had added first fire layer on the first 5 frames. This used to really confuse me, because I always thought if I was putting the same layer on multiple frames like this, it would make it look still. But because it's actually moving so fast, I believe I did 10 frames per second, it still looks like it's moving. It's just moving slower. If you just had one animation, you could just lower your frames per second rate. But if you have multiple animations going on, you can do this to kind of bypass that and still have a slower animation, even though your frames per second is very high. I'll show you the final animation. I am really happy with how it turned out. I think it was really fun. The whole reason I got into animating was so I could do cool stuff like this to illustrations, and it's really cool to kind of see it slowly coming together. If you are new to animating and you want some tips for beginners, I do have a video which you can check out here. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!